Have you ever walked into a room and felt the mood shift before anyone said a word? Maybe someone said, I'm fine, but you can hear in their voice that they weren't. Most people miss those moments. Some people feel like a punch in the chest. If that sounds familiar, today's episode is for you. My guest, Todd Smith, is a coach who helps highly sensitive people manage stress. He's also the host of the podcast Stress Management for Highly Sensitive People. He explains why some of us feel the world more deeply and how the sensitivity can turn into strength instead of overwhelm. We talk about the stress that builds up at home, the weight of other people's emotions, and the simple tools that can help you stay steady even when everything around you feels loud. If you ever replayed a comment for days or felt drained after being around people, this conversation might make you feel seen. Next on the podcast, let's do this.
Welcome to the No Sitting on the Sideline Dad podcast, a podcast about a journey of discovery and conversations about not sitting on the sideline of life. Let's get involved. Here's host Joe Foley.
Thank you for being here today. I appreciate you listening. And if this is your first time, welcome to the podcast. Let me ask you something. Ever walk into a room immediately know who is in a bad mood? Even before they do. Pick up on the vibe, the tone, the eye twitching, everything. Meanwhile, someone else walks in and says, looks fine to me. And you're standing there thinking, hey, are we even in the same room? If this sounds familiar, you're in the right place. Today we're going to talk about why some people feel the world more deeply, why your brain might be working overtime when everyone else seems relaxed, and more importantly, how to stay steady when life gets loud. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast, Todd.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to be here.
What does really means to be highly sensitive? Because I'm not quite sure, because sometimes it gets a bad rap.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are different ways that sensitivity shows up. Obviously, if you get stressed, you become sensitive. But what I'm talking about when I say highly sensitive people is something that's been studied scientifically, and it is a trait. About 15 to 20% of the world's population has this. Shows up in different species, almost 100 species they looked at. 15 to 20% of the population shows this trait of being highly sensitive. What it is, there's an acronym that helps to describe it. It's DOES, like the word does. D is for depth of processing. So highly sensitive people process things more deeply than the average person. That means every conversation, the data that comes in, that they take that and make connections, process it, and come to conclusions in a very thorough way. Then the O is overwhelm. Because of that depth of processing, it can max out the system quicker than for other people. And so as a result, what happens is what is a normal stimulating environment for one person, if you're highly sensitive, you're going to get overwhelmed quicker because of that depth of processing. Then the E part is emotion or empathy. And so highly sensitive people are known for their empathy, and they feel emotions more strongly, and they notice other people's emotions, and they care about other people. It's part of this trait. And then finally, the S in DOES is a sensitivity itself. So I like to say average person, if you ask them to count from 1 to 10, they'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Highly sensitive persons go 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. They're noticing a lot more subtle things there, and they can't help it. And so as a result, when a highly sensitive person goes into a big superstore or something, the chances of them getting overwhelmed is a little higher than the average person. Or when there's a lot going on, or if there's being pulled in 10 directions at once, they're going to reach overwhelm quicker than the average person.
One question I was thinking about when you're talking about the DOES model is depth of processing. What is that all about? Can you go a little more deeper into that? Because I found that interesting.
It is interesting. My dad was a highly sensitive person like I am, and he used to say that he's a slow processor. And I'm the same way. My grandmother used to call it methodical. And that is a hallmark of being someone who's highly sensitive, that you take your time. We're built for depth, not speed. So where some people excel at quick reaction and doing things in a really quick way, we as highly sensitive people excel in like really plumbing the depth and taking our time to do that. In a social situation, we'll notice a social cue, like just change of expression or some little word and what that meant. And then we'll start thinking about that. What is that? What's really going on here? And actually go deeper in with it. And it leads to interesting conclusions, often quite accurate. It also shows up in business or in work where we can end up noticing or being able to analyze things quite deeply. It's just a strength.
I think about when you're saying that though, reflecting. A lot of people like that, we're like, you say something and they don't realize. I'm giving an example. Somebody said something recently, and I've been thinking about this for well, probably 7 years, and this whole problem. And that one person all of a sudden said some word, but I don't think this person realized it, and it was the missing piece of the puzzle. But I've been reflecting on it for 7 years, so
Yes.
that amount of time. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that is part of the like the trait of high sensitivity. And you may have some of that, I don't know, but
Yeah.
there's this tendency to keep mulling it over until it becomes clear. And that's yeah, it's a unique trait.
What are some things that like make people so like really sensitive? Is it? What makes them so sensitive?
There are two things that make people sensitive. One is your genetics, your makeup. And if you have this trait, you have it. And so there's not anything that makes it on the outside. It's just that we're born this way. And so some of us are just more sensitive by nature. We've been that way since we were young, and that's just the way we are. However, there's another interesting aspect here, and this falls into what I do, which is stress management, is that when the system gets stressed, when we do get into that overwhelm space or we start to get just a little too thin, then then the sensitivity can go up. And
Hmm.
so even if you're not a highly sensitive person by nature, your sensitivity will go up as your stress goes up. And so if you can reduce your stress, then your reactive kind of sensitivity will tend to reduce, but you're never going to change the natural type of sensitivity that your body has. So I think we have to keep in mind like nature versus the imbalance. And we reduce the imbalance, but we also honor the nature. And so highly sensitive people have to protect themselves a little more because they're just not built for a lot of loud experiences. But that doesn't mean they have to become stressed. If you do take care of yourself, you'll be in a balanced way as a sensitive person.
You talked for a second. I was thinking about like reading the room. Like they can walk in and can read the room very quickly, or listen to somebody's voice and hear it in somebody's voice, and they don't realize the person doesn't realize it, but the person coming, like the person sensitive person come in, I think can read the room.
Yes, exactly right. These are subtle cues, like just the tone of voice, the energy of the person, the way their eyes are moving. These make a difference. They communicate information, and a highly sensitive person tends to pick up on that kind of information.
But also looking back, what personal stories you can tell about dealing with situations like this, and that you can remember.
Good question. Let me think. Yeah, when I was young, I guess in our family we there was a lot of sensitivity. We tended to know what each other was thinking half the time. And you think that's normal, but then you realize it's not for everybody. And sometimes that clashes. Like when I got out in the real world, I'd be like, oh my gosh, you don't see what I'm seeing. And it could be a little bit of a mismatch. I remember when I got married, it was like, oh my gosh, I felt like I came into a relationship and my hearing aids were turned all the way up. And when my partner started screaming or yelling or just even talking or even just slightly pointing the finger, it felt like a huge thing for me because of that sensitivity. So I think that's one of the things that comes in for us as sensitive people is that we sometimes have trouble like adjusting to the different volumes going on. I don't know if I've answered your question in terms of stories of me. I'm going to have to think of this and let me see if it pops up as we keep going.
Another thing that was interesting too is HSPS. The kind of like, what is that about? I was curious about that.
H
I don't know why I put that extra S, but
Yeah,
HSP.
you could say like HSP and then in the plural would be HSPS, like HS HSPs, right? HSP and HSPs. That is just a simple way of saying a highly sensitive person. So it is referring to this trait that we've been talking about. And it's common. You'll hear people say, oh, I'm an HSP or I'm a highly sensitive person.
But interesting too. I also think of people like gets really sensitive. Always think they're maybe think they're the problem or something, or maybe when they come into a room and they feel somebody's angry. Do they think sometimes do they blame themselves for the feelings of really of all the anger and stuff, or whatever the feeling is in the room?
Yeah, there's a tendency to feel, I don't know if it depends on the person, but for me, what happens is we often think that we're too sensitive. And people maybe have told us, you're too sensitive. Come on, toughen up. You just stop being so emotional. And these give us a feeling as highly sensitive people that there is something wrong with us, that we need to do something about it. And so when we notice that, like in a room, there's some anger, we may try to hide that feeling or feel ashamed that we even noticed that because of kind of input that we've gotten from others that we're too sensitive, we're too dramatic or something like that. It can also happen that because we're so empathetic that we feel the emotion just like the other person is having, like there's a lot of anger, we start feeling that and it's starting to affect us. And we may again judge ourselves as being too sensitive as a result.
So basically, would it be the best situation to pull yourself out of that situation and take care of yourself?
If you've gotten overwhelmed, yeah, then like we all have an optimal window of, they call it optimal window of arousal, where it's not too under aroused, not too over aroused, but just in the sweet spot. And if we get too far into the overwhelmed place, then the best thing to do is to go take some time. You know, even just go to the bathroom, take a break, get out of the room for a minute, take a breath. Or if it's getting too much, just say, I'm leaving early, that kind of thing. So, yeah, taking care of yourself is super important. If you're not in the overwhelmed place, then there's not a problem, basically.
The word keeps coming to my mind, empathic. I don't know if that
Yep.
means in something we were talking about.
There's a overlap between empaths and highly sensitive people. Basically, all empaths are highly sensitive people, but not all highly sensitive people are empaths. And the distinction, as I understand it, is that highly sensitive people are aware of people's feelings. Empaths feel their feelings and have trouble distinguishing between what's their feeling, what's the other person's feeling. So there's empath is even more connected with the other person.
Oh, it's interesting. When I think about the word in sense of people, I think empath and stuff like that.
Yeah, very connected, very similar.
One thing that was interesting too is the work of Byron Katie. The one we talked about practicing the intro. What is that about?
That is an amazing little process for stress, dealing with stress, any kind of stressful situation. I've been doing it for about 18 years, almost daily. It's one of my practices. And it is just very elegant and powerful at taking a stressful moment, stressful situation, and looking at it differently. So, the way it works is you start with a moment where you got triggered and something stressed you or bugged you or someone annoyed you or whatever, or even you felt sad or you feel fear. Something got to you. And then you go, okay, what is it? What am I thinking? What is the thought behind this emotion? And you write down the thought and then you question it. And when you question it, you're not just questioning it intellectually, you're questioning it, you're basically asking these questions of the part of you that's stuck, the part of you
Mhm.
that's got angered, and saying, hey, this person doesn't respect you. That was what you were thinking. Is that really true? Are you sure? And then that part gets to go, wait a minute. Yes, it is true. Or "Oh, I'm not sure. Maybe there's more to it than I thought." And it starts to open a little bit. And then you look at how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And you get to see the repercussions and you start to see how much comes out of you when you're believing just one little thought, right? That person doesn't respect me. Suddenly I'm angry. I'm slamming doors. I'm becoming aggressive or passive aggressive or anything in between. And then you play with, okay, who would you be in that same situation if you weren't believing that they weren't respecting you, even though they said exactly the same thing? And as you sit in that, it can open up possibilities there that you may not have noticed. And suddenly you're seeing, okay, those words, I wouldn't like, I can see why I thought they weren't respecting me there, but there are other possibilities of what could have been going on. And if I'm not so zoomed in on them not respecting me, I'm way less reactive. And so you start exploring like this and you play with turnarounds. Could the opposite be true? Maybe they were respecting you, and maybe I wasn't respecting myself or I wasn't respecting them. You start looking at it from all these different angles, but all the time connected to your direct experience and not BSing in any way, with the open mind that maybe this opposite is true and maybe it isn't. When you go through this process, in my experience, something often shifts and something expands. And I start to see what I thought was a terrible experience or just a unpleasant experience. And I start seeing it as, okay, now I'm seeing more of what was going on possibly on the other side. It unhooks me and I'm not no longer triggered by that same experience. And then the beautiful thing about it is once that's done, because it's on a felt level, when you go back into similar situations again, a lot of times you end up seeing your way through it and just sidestepping it. And that's the beauty of it.
You're talking, it seems like it's just stepping out of it and then taking an outside approach to it and looking in. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, it's becoming more objective, but not doing it in an intellectual way, like actually asking the most immature part of me to step into this kind of work and see if it can see a broader perspective, if it can see it from the outside a little more or from a bigger perspective. It basically expands your awareness. That's what it does. And when you have a bigger porthole to look through, things that you didn't see when you're just zoomed in on, he didn't respect me.
It seems like emotion gets in the way a little bit too.
Yes, exactly. And that's what narrows the vision, right? The emotion comes in and then it becomes a vicious cycle. Oh, he didn't respect me. And now I have more proof. You know how if you point the mind in a direction, it will find proof to back it up. So if we point the mind in the direction of he didn't respect me, it's going to find all the reasons and it's going to keep building a case of why it's true. If you point the mind in the opposite direction, is it possible that he's not doing that? That he's actually respecting me somehow? Then your mind will start finding examples to balance that. And when the balance comes in, that's when the expansion comes. That's when the unhooking starts to happen.
Definitely interesting too, although the work and stuff like that is that a form of therapy?
It's not therapy, it's self inquiry. Therapists are trained and have studied the mind and have all kinds of training in that. People who do the work of Byron Katie, like I'm a facilitator, I was trained in that. But what I'm not trained in psychology, I'm not trained in knowing everything about the human mind. What I am trained is how to hold the space for someone so that they feel really safe and non threatened and can get in touch with their own wisdom and then can start working things out on their own. So, my job is to be a container for them in that process.
Interesting. I found that I was thinking about also too is sensitivity because I'm all parenting stuff like sensitivity and caregiving and family stress. Being a parent, especially trying to read, I have a 12-year-old, trying to read him is really hard. But
Yes.
how was your day? Good. What was good about it? Nothing bad happened. Okay, that's not even an answer. But what how is that involved in especially family stress, caregiving, parenting? How can that come about?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's a great area for using the work of Byron Katie because um, it allows you to use everyday situations to gain clarity about what's really going on and to gain understanding for the people that frustrate you or the people that don't have that makes your life challenging. They, there's something that Byron Katie created called the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. So you literally can write out all the things that are annoying you about that person in that particular moment. And it can be extremely relieving and almost fun to do, even though it is stressful. You're like, oh, I'm so angry at him because he didn't respect me again. He didn't pay attention. I want him to do this. He should do that. I need him to. And he just put it all on paper. And then just getting it out is already therapeutic. And then, secondly, you can take any of those statements and question them, like we were just talking about a few minutes ago. And you start seeing a bigger perspective. And suddenly, the same thing, a grunt from a teenager, is not as stressful as it was before you do that work. So, yes, it can be very helpful that way.
I just it's interesting too, especially as older population. I know myself, I have older parents and stuff like that, and taking care of them can be very stressful too, and watch them age and go through sicknesses and stuff like that. So it can be difficult. How can it be used? In this can be helpful to deal with that.
Absolutely. Same thing. I live with my 92-year-old mother-in-law and she has dementia. It's not easy. Like she gets argumentative. She doesn't want to shower. She doesn't want to take her medicine. She forgets things. She thinks she knows everything, even though she doesn't. So it goes on. And any one of those moments, if it gets to me, that's my little red flag saying, oh, something's going on inside of you, Todd, not just the situation, but something got you. So pay attention. What is going on? What is it about what she just did or didn't do that bothers you? And then I'll write down my thoughts. I could use a worksheet again, judge your neighbor, or I could just write my thought down and be like, oh, you know what? She doesn't like me or something. Or it could be, I want her to take her medicine, or she's a pain in the ass, or something like that. You can literally take whatever thoughts come out of your head, go through this process, and in my experience, it begins to open a new way of seeing it because I'll see, oh, yeah, I'm a pain in the ass, right? I'm not the only one here. And maybe she wasn't as much of a pain as I thought she was in that moment. And you start playing devil's advocate with yourself, and then it starts loosening. So it works so well with those kinds of situations.
Yeah, again, take an outside perspective and realize this person who's sick and stuff like that you're trying to help.
Exactly. Right. And we know that intellectually, but intellectual is not enough. I know she's old and she's got dementia, and I can't expect her to be like a normal person. I know that intellectually, and I pay attention to that. I'm not mean or something, but inside there's a part of me. It's immature, but there's a part of me going, "Oh, why'd she just stop that? Like, why doesn't she wash her dishes?" And you can just what this allows is a chance to deal with that immature part of myself that it doesn't get it yet, and allow it to have a chance to be heard and to work it through itself instead of just always top down administrating, saying, come on, smarten up, she's just got dementia. It's not as respectful as giving it a chance to literally get it out and then work through it on its own.
It's interesting. You ever felt guilty for writing anything down?
In the beginning, I did. I'm like, oh my God, I shouldn't even have these thoughts, let alone write them down. And hopefully nobody finds this piece of paper. But what happened is, as I've done the work over the years, I've learned that every time I do it, I end up finding my part in it. I start finding my responsibility, where what I'm responsible for. I end up being kinder and seeing them in a much brighter light. And so I realize, oh, this is just a process. This is stage one of that process, is getting it out. And then but where it leads is something actually very kind and compassionate.
One thing that was interesting too is boundaries. Now, building connections. How can this help do that?
Yeah, boundaries are an interesting one. Basically, boundaries are when we need to take care of ourselves. So, going back to being a highly sensitive person, we may need to go to bed earlier than someone else, or we may need to step out of a party somewhere, or may just not want to take on another social engagement. There are a million things that we may want to say no to, and it's healthy to say no to. But what happens is we may be so empathetic and trying to avoid somebody not liking us that we end up overriding our own natural instinct, which is, I don't think I want to go. And so, what we can do is look at the thoughts that we're believing about that situation. And sometimes there's something like, I need them to like me, or I don't want them to be disappointed with me, or something along those lines where I'm dependent on them and I can't control how they think or feel. And so my reaction is when I'm believing that is to please them and forget about myself. So when you question these kinds of thoughts that are leading you off into their business instead of staying in your own, it frees you up and you start realizing, wait a minute, I don't have to get their approval. It's not absolutely necessary. I will survive. And then the courage starts to come up of, I like to actually opt out of this, or I actually want to say no to this. So that's the inner work side of building boundaries. The outer work, you still have to say the right thing, still have to say no, and there's different ways to do that. But basically, I'm not going to ever get to that point if I'm still believing that I need their approval or I need them to be not angry at me or that kind of thing. So,
Why did
yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, why do people think I always need validation from other people? Because
Great question. It seems to be the biggest issue we have as not highly sensitive people. One of the biggest issues we have as human beings is this needing approval. And I think it comes from a couple things. I think partly it's just the social instinct. We don't want to be excluded. We don't want to be kicked out of the tribe or not be a part of the group. And then I think it's also just how we come into this world. We're born, we don't have any language, we don't have anything, we don't know anything. And our parents teach us everything. They know how to do everything, how to eat, how to everything. And so we learn that what's important is outside of us. And I think that's important for coming into the world so that we can learn how to manage and live and be successful in the world. But there's a certain point where that breaks down and is no longer actually helpful. And we still are looking to the approval of those around us. Are we doing it right? Am I in the right place? And that's like, we have to grow beyond that and start checking in with ourselves and finding that can be a source of direction and wisdom instead.
I was wondering, is any like structure or framework somebody could go to look at it and use it in their lives?
In what way? What do you mean
Like
structure or
process
framework?
for boundaries and stuff like that.
Oh, for boundaries. I don't have like a framework per se, but what I do tend to think of in simple terms is whose business am I in? Am I in my business or am I in their business? And if I'm in their business, I'm wanting their approval, or I think that they have something that I need, or I'm trying to control them or trying to change something that I can't change. If I'm in my business, I'm asking myself, I'm checking in with myself, and I'm on solid ground. So if there's a shortcut to all of it, it's like just whose business am I in? And can I come back to being in my business a little bit more? Doing the work, doing these kinds of inquiry can help bring you back into it when you can't just jump there. But the basic idea is, have I asked myself, what do I think?
I was thinking another thing too is especially high sensitive people can probably, I think, would avoidance conflict, avoid conflict.
Absolutely. Yes. There's a reason for that, and that is we feel things strongly. That's that emotional component, DOES,
Mhm.
and the S part, sensitivity, and the depth part. It all comes into play because a little ripple, we're going to feel a little ripple, but a large wave, we're going to really feel that. And so we tend to want to avoid it. And it's good to avoid conflict. Of course it is. But some conflict can't be avoided. And part of what makes conflict even worse for a highly sensitive person is when we're afraid of it or thinking that it's worse than it is or exaggerating it in any way. And so if we can, again, question any of the thoughts that are exaggerating it or making it more scary than it is, then it just comes down to, okay, there's a certain sensitivity here. I'm probably going to minimize my exposure to it. but I'm not caught by it. So conflict is something that is, yeah, it's a part of life, but we as highly sensitive people prefer to minimize for sure.
I think about that avoiding something like that. Somebody with a situation like think it's about that big. The problem is really about that, but we think
Yes.
it's like the big of a school bus, the problem. And when you come to realize it's all in your head because you
Yes.
feel that'd be like driving, for example. You get stressed on from experience and you get scared and panicked because you're like, oh, I can't stand the stress. But you realize it's not that bad.
That's it.
Just-
Yeah.
And
As we say, the story, my story about what's happening is far worse than the reality of what's happening. And so if I can recognize the difference between my story and the reality and stick with reality more often, then I'm going to be less stressed. I'm going to be less reactive. And that's exactly what this process of inquiry is all about. It's like cutting through the story. He doesn't respect me, like I said, or this traffic is crazy. Okay, is that really true? Just bring it back down few notches. And what happens is, oh, it's not as overwhelming. Or here's a favorite one of mine. Like I used to think my partner was yelling at me. When I really looked at it, I'm like, he's not yelling at me at all. He's just pointing out something I don't want to hear.
but it's interesting to think about that for a second because the problem I've my experience in being a parent too, and sometimes, and I think it's this huge problem. It's really small. It's a really small situation.
Yeah.
One thing also too is talk about any examples you could think of helping somebody, some story that was a breakthrough that you can share.
Sure. Yeah. I work with people all the time, and it is amazing to see what happens when this starts to sink in, when it starts to actually land. I'm trying to think of a good example here. Yeah, like I know someone that was dealing with death, right? The death of a spouse, and she was doing pretty good, but still like that sadness is so there. And so we did some work on this situation, and I asked her to literally tell me what she's feeling. Like, what is she really, what is she? And she's, I want my partner to be back. It's almost like a little kid. I want my mommy or I want my daddy or like that. And so we just sat and worked with that primordial kind of want. And then what happened is it's like the when we went through it, there was an experience of I have my partner, I have, or I want myself, or I don't want my partner. Like these things at first seem something that you couldn't even go to, but when you go through them in a very systematic and slow way, connected to your emotion, they start to open. And her experience was like a lot of the grief started to lift. So I watch this tiny little situations, social situations, big trauma type situations. The outcome is the same, the process is the same, but it's just how you connect with the feeling and then go through that process.
I was also curious about too. Is there anything out there like maybe a stress test or some kind of like book or something you recommend somebody to read to help them get through situation?
When you say stress test, I actually have an HSP stress test on my website,
Mhm.
which is trueinnerfreedom.com. It's a great way to find out like where you're at, like where your levels of anxiety, depression, stress are. And it also tests whether you're an HSP or not as well. But it's there are a lot of resources out there in terms of stress. I think being aware of where you're actually at can be really helpful because otherwise you think, oh, I'm fine. This is my normal. But when you really look at it objectively, whoa, my normal is on the severe side instead of on the mild side. And so just having that information is very helpful.
I think about that for a second. But find out where you are at with your stress and stuff too, is because it can affect your health too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stress is the biggest contributor to health problems. And that's been known for decades. Any way that you can, first of all, be aware that you are stressed is key. And then learning the tools to begin to reduce that stress is important. I say there's three pillars of stress management for highly sensitive people. One is just understanding the trait. And when you understand that, you find a little more self-compassion for yourself. You realize there's nothing wrong with you. You just are a unique kind of person, and you're not alone. And then the other two are doing inner work, like we've been talking about, and then more lifestyle integration and outer work where you build routines that support you and protect yourself, guardrail against getting too burnt out or overextended so that you can be in that optimal place more often.
Definitely too. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was you're also the host of the podcast Stress Management for Highly Sensitive People. How has that been for you?
Oh, it's great. I've been podcasting for about 3.5 years now. I have almost 300 episodes out, and it's something that I enjoy. I learn by doing it myself, and I'm always thinking, okay, what are we going to talk about next? It comes out 3 times a week, so it keeps my definitely feet to the fire. But I really enjoy it. They're short episodes, 10, 15 minutes, usually solo episodes, and I just dive into the different issues that highly sensitive people tend to face and then look at how can we deal with it. Sometimes it's something practical. Sometimes it's just putting on some noise canceling headphones or something. And other times it is looking at how could you do some deeper inner work on that and find more peace in that situation.
What kind of feedback have you got from your podcast?
Everyone that I've heard from, which is not all that many people, but everyone who does actually pick up an email and send it to me has been thanking me and telling me that it's been super effective. One lady says she listens to it every night before she goes to bed.
I guess your voice is soothing, Todd.
I guess so. Who knew?
Wrapping up, Todd, final thoughts. What do you want to leave to anybody about highly sensitive people or what can they do to help themselves?
Yeah, I think educating yourself about this trait is super important. If you just listening seem to think you might be in that ballpark of highly sensitive, then go take the test. It's free. Read some books. There are a number of books on Amazon you can get on highly sensitive people. Just search that term and then go to my website, trueinnerfreedom.com. I have a 6-month program of stress management designed specifically for highly sensitive people. And we use all these tools, and you get a sense of community, you get access to me, and it can be very transformative as well.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you much for being on the podcast. And I really do appreciate it. All links will be in the show notes for this episode. Thank you much for your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's been great talking with you.
All right, before we wrap up, let me leave you with a final thought. Life gets loud, people get messy, and if you feel things are a little stronger for the next person, it doesn't make you broken. It means you pick up the parts of life that others walk just right past it. Use it. Don't hide it. Big thanks to Todd for hanging out today and sharing his insights. If you want to find more about him, his work, or his podcast, all links are waiting for you in the show notes. Head over to nosittingonthesideline.com/170. For everything in this episode that we talked about, be over there. Until next time, take care. God bless. See you.